So he fought a total of 81 matches.
Yes.
And won 76 and 68 by knockout.
Yep.
That has to be the best record in some sense of the word.
Yes.
And certainly in the heavyweight category.
Yes, it sure was in history.
Welcome to Life's Third Act, an enlightening look at estate planning, retirement, and beyond.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week we're going to talk about George Foreman. Certainly those of you who are over, 40? Certainly should know that name. Yeah. I mean, he's a boxing legend. And he died this year. He died in March. So this is recent. This is a little different for us because, often the estate stuff hasn't worked its way through yet. And often we'll do somebody who's died a number of years ago, but not too distant. But yet distant enough to where all the lawsuits and all that stuff that commonly happens when rich and or famous people die is that there tends to be litigation. Not all the time. I don't want to paint this as worse than it is, but let's face it, where there's cameras or where there's money, you tend to have somebody who brings an action of some sort. So it makes for interesting opportunities to watch and learn from our perspective and presumably yours. But in this case, it is a recent case, and we thought that because George was such an impressive person, and because we think that there's probably not as much uncertainty lying out there relating to his affairs, meaning his business and life affairs, that I think we can safely go forward and do this and be helpful in terms of making some observations about the way he approached his life and, for us, as importantly, his death. So before we go there, I'd like to emphasize to you that we would love to have you like and subscribe. We're right on the precipice of 50,000
so close
subscribers. I mean, for us, that's a big number. We all know that we go to channels where there are millions, but for us, 50,000 is a huge goal. Given the topic of this show, we didn't think it would have great broad interest, but it's something we enjoy talking about and we know something about. So we've persisted and we've enjoyed it. And we've also enjoyed more popularity than we expected. So we're excited about the fact that we're right on the threshold of the 50,000, and we're hopeful that you will like and subscribe. Mm-hmm. And then once we get past 50, dare we hope for what would be the next big number? 100?
Let's go for 100. Why not? Right?
Yeah,
we know you can help make it happen.
Yeah, I may not have enough time for that. You would have enough time for that, but anyway. So let's pour into it. Well, first, as is our pattern whenever we're doing these shows, is that we like to take time, talk a little bit about the life. We don't purport to be the experts on each of these lives, but we need to talk about their lives because it gives context, typically, often necessarily, to understand kind of the estate situation. So we'll start by spending some time talking about George's life.
He was from quite a big family, so didn't have a lot of money. He was part of a family of 6, so he had 5 siblings with him. And he was raised primarily by his mother. His dad was kind of out of the picture. He was raised by his stepfather.
Left. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he considered his stepfather his dad. Yeah. Which that's the last name, Foreman, as well. Okay. So he didn't have a whole lot of money. He actually dropped out of school at 15. And then at 16, he joined the Job Corps. And that then ended up leading him into carpentry and bricklaying. And he also had that encounter with boxing, and he liked it.
I was impressed with the fact that he had initiative as a kid. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of kids his age who perhaps presented with things such as Jobs Corps, which is one of those programs that apparently was beneficial to a lot of people. And, he seized it.
Yeah, he seized it. And it came back even later in his life. I mean, yes, he's boxing, but then he became an entrepreneur. He got into the business world, and he was very successful.
Yeah. And he met a man whose name, I guess, is not important for our purposes, but who was very important to the life of George Foreman, and this was through Jobs Corps. And so you may be wondering, how do you get from learning bricklaying and carpentry to boxing? But I think that this guy who volunteered his time with Jobs Corps, I think that he saw his role really as finding a niche for someone's life, for each of those kids. And he started out, with the standard skills and trades that were offered. And I think that he observed that George had been involved in a couple of sports. I think he liked football, but then he got a taste of boxing.
But it kind of reminds me of Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. He's building things with his hands. I mean, that's kind of, you got to use your hands a lot for boxing. So maybe there's a connection. It's a stretch.
That's an interesting comparison in any case. But I do think, though, that this guy was committed to these kids succeeding, and he was alert enough to see that George had this interest and quickly observed that this guy's got some talent. Yes. So, I think he was behind George's decision to still, at that point, probably 17 or so years old. George went to L.A. to continue, this training for boxing.
Take it to the next level.
Yeah. So thank God that George had in his life somebody like this. So he moves up quickly. We'll move along. So let's move to the point where his first success as a boxer was
gold medal in the Olympics in 1968.
Yeah.
So wow, what a moment for him. And he was, like you said, 16 years old.
Well, I think he may have been 19. The point is
19.
He's young.
Yes.
I mean, that was the heavyweight division, which
little guy.
All
right?
divisions are not ranked equally, and the heavyweight gold medal in boxing is always kind of the thing that the public wants to see, that match, and it's quite an honor. It's the greatest honor in boxing, dare I say. So he goes, the next year's when he goes professional.
Yes, and he turned professional in 1969, and he won his debut fight, knockout. So what a way to start.
Let's move through this quickly. I'm sure it's much too quickly for those of you who really have an interest in boxing. But look, if you're really wanting information about boxing, you probably didn't turn to this channel. No. But I will say this. His record was just incredible. Over the course of his career.
Oh my goodness. He had 76 wins, 68 by knockout, and only 5 losses.
So he fought a total of 81 matches.
Yes.
And won 76 and 68 by knockout.
Yep.
That has to be the best record in some sense of the word.
Yes.
And certainly in the heavyweight category.
Yes, it sure was. In history. I mean, he made history. I mean, and you look at that even a step further and think about how the fact that he took a time out.
Yeah, of 10
years. He retired.
Yeah.
And came back.
So, but before you do that, though, he was an incredible boxer. And what a record. I mean, if you think about the blows that you take, what we know now about the impact on the brain, and we know about PTSD and these things associated with blows against the head, and we think now about football a lot and concussing and all that's involved in those sorts of head injuries. I mean, boxing. There's just no...
You're asking for it. I mean,
there's just no... I mean, it's about hitting the head, essentially.
And especially back then. I mean, even boxing has changed today, but still is dangerous. I
mean, there's not any way to make it safe for a guy that weighs 200-plus pounds hitting you in the head with all his might. And so my hat's off to people who can endure, this many fights. And there was nothing... I suspect his family would have noticed something cognitive later in his life. I'll just assume that. But man, he appeared to be in such good shape. And we compare him to another great fighter. Yeah. In fairness, I'm from Kentucky, I'd have to say a greater fighter, Muhammad Ali. But still, you look at Muhammad Ali, the last part of his life.
Yeah,
I mean, it was really bad.
Yeah.
And I think everybody imputes that to those blows he took in the last 4 or 5 fights. They probably shouldn't have fought. But anyway, so I was really impressed. I knew George Foreman was a great fighter, and I had watched him in interviews. I'd seen old fight films. Because I like Muhammad Ali. What is it? Rumble in the Jungle is what that was called.
Rumble in the Jungle, yep.
It was a huge fight. Those of you who are old enough to remember, this was televised. There were people around the world watching it. It was this was Muhammad Ali's effort to regain the world title. Remember, he had been, he was a conscientious objector, so he was convicted. I think he was convicted, and he didn't. Did he go to prison? Anyway, he wasn't. He didn't qualify to be excluded from the military of the Vietnam War, but because he had had a religious conversion, he was a Muslim, and this conversion took place, just a few years before, and it was definitely genuine. We know because he held to this faith to his death. He just didn't qualify. Went to court and everything, and ultimately, he was convicted of failing to serve, and he lost. He had to forfeit his title, so he couldn't box for like 5, 6, 7 years, a long time, important years in his life. And then he tried to come back with Frazier, Joe Frazier, and he fought. And this was considered the battle of the century, I remember. Some of you who are old enough remember this. It was highly publicized. And this was also a big fight.
Yeah.
And many people expected, I think that probably the odds were in favor. I'm thinking what Jimmy the Greek was saying at the time, and I think the odds were in favor of Ali. Frazier was a good fighter, the bull and heavy hitter. And Ali, to his credit, he made it all 15 rounds. This was a 15-round fight at the time, which some states didn't permit. I think this was in Vegas. It was a 15-round fight, and Ali made it to the end. He was standing. It wasn't a knockout, but he fought with a broken jaw. And, his jaw was broken probably the 7th or 8th round. I think I'm correct on all this. If I'm not, remember, I'm not an expert on boxing. But I will tell you that I was amazed at watching that fight and thinking about Ali. And so Ali loses this. So he still doesn't have his title back. And I think the next fight he had for the title was with George Foreman. George Foreman, after that, beat Frazier. So George Foreman beat Frazier. Now Ali has a chance to get back the title. Mm-hmm. And this is the reason it's called the Rumble in the Jungle. It was almost as big and maybe as big or bigger than the fight with Frazier, which is called the Battle of the Century.
And he was not expected to win because he was older.
Yeah, he was older, and Ali was still trim. Ali was still young. If you look at Ali in that fight, which I've not seen for a long time, but Ali looked sharp and trim. George Foreman didn't look quite as good, quite frankly, as Ali. And Ali won. Ali won, and that was the way he regained his title. That was probably, it wasn't long after that Foreman decides to retire. His first retirement, he was retired for a 10-year period. So at the time he retired, he was only 27, 28 years old, which is pretty young. Even for a boxer, it's pretty young and to retire. But he lost like 3 matches after that, 2 or 3 matches. So when you look at how few he lost over his entire career, he won 76, and again, he lost. He was in a total of 81, but so he lost just 5 his whole career. So there's not a lot of fights you can find where he lost. But I think 2 or 3 of those might have been after he was beaten by Ali, maybe a couple of them.
Yeah.
So then,
and that got him good when those losses really he carried them with him for the rest of his life.
And he felt that after one of those fights, he had kind of declined, and the audience wasn't really behind him. It's interesting how things change. And he was in the locker room after that, and he had a religious experience.
Near death.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. He felt he was dying, and he had familiarity with Christianity. I'm sure he'd gone to church, some part of his life. And that was when he became a Christian through this event that occurred after this, I think the second fight that went really badly, and he was just in bad shape after that, and so his life changed. He decided to retire, and people were surprised. The world was, because a guy 28 years old
still young.
He had a number of years left to fight.
Yeah, and it was Jimmy Young that was that last fight, Jimmy Young, in 1977, and that's when he was like, I'm out.
So, that fight really went bad, apparently, and I don't know anything about Jimmy Young. But anyway, so we remember the name George Foreman, but not Jimmy Young. So
Exactly.
But George Foreman becomes a full-time pastor, right?
Yeah.
He pastored a church.
That came out of like left field in a way.
He did missions work.
Yeah.
I mean, not many
Really
boxers take that path.
No, he started a church and was all about giving back.
Yeah, and he just all these charitable activities he did for like a 10-year period, and he I don't doubt at all the sincerity of his religious conversion. In fact, he felt that way and took that stand and had that faith to his death. So it's interesting that he lost 10 years of this career, and you wonder, could he have pulled his life back together? But I think he was letting himself slide a little bit. I think if he had been in tip-top shape, I think he would have done better against Ali. Ali had boasted in advance of that fight that he was in as good a shape as he had ever been. He said he was in better shape than he was when he fought Sonny Liston like 10 years before.
Well, he also didn't do his normal thing. He did that rope-a-dope tactic.
Oh, yeah.
And that got him.
Yeah.
They were not expecting that.
Ali's famous for that. So he really wore Foreman down. So again, in my opinion, Ali is a better fighter than showing about Ali. Have we done Ali? I'm sure we have.
I have not with you, but maybe you have in the past.
I think we did. Justin, we do Muhammad Ali?
I don't think we did.
Oh.
All right,
We got to write that
down. This is a great oversight. Hopefully we'll be able to do that if we haven't. But you might check back like 6 years ago. I thought maybe we talked about Ali.
We've been doing the show for a long time. And
we have.
I feel bad when I don't have every single one trapped in my brain, but
well, I feel bad when you don't too. But that's okay.
Slacker.
Yeah. We do keep records. You know, we need to look better. We need to look more organized to our audience, particularly if we're going to hit 50,000. Normally, we have this wonderful file. Justin keeps everything in perfect order. And on those rare occasions that things are not at his fingertips, he can look it up. So George Foreman decides for various reasons that he wants to return to the ring. And I don't know exactly the details of that story.
Well, I heard some stories about that maybe finances became a little bit of an issue, that he spent a little bit too much money here and there.
Yeah, and maybe not enough in the offering plate.
Maybe.
Yeah. So he gets back in, and that's the reason boxers often go back. And often it's sad, and rarely is it good when they go back like that. And you look, I think of Joe Louis. Joe Louis is such a tragic situation where he definitely became what, before you had neurologists giving more technical names to it, people like that who had been in boxers were known as being punch drunk. And Joe Louis was really sad. He was he was given a job as simply a favor, really, in Las Vegas, a greeter. And it was a way for him to earn some money, and he was a celebrity. But, he was one of the greats for sure. All historians put Joe Louis up there, whether it's 4th, 5th, 6th, maybe 7th or 8th, but not below that, I'm pretty sure. He was a wonderful fighter and held the title for quite a while in the 40s. So,
well, we can't forget, though, that George has 12 mouths to feed.
Yeah, but before we get to that,
these kids.
but and that is probably doubtlessly that's a factor too. Yeah, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But so George decides to get back in the ring, and this has a good ending. Against all expectations, he wins back the title. So if we didn't make this clear before, he's held all the unified titles. It broke up somewhere when did the world heavyweight titles break off between the world heavyweight and the national? Do we know those categories? We're getting out of our depth here.
Was it in the 80s, 90s?
Yeah.
Probably?
Yeah, we're getting over our heads in this discussion. But anyway, so they were fully unified again, though, and Foreman was among those who held both those titles. So for him to regain it at resuming boxing at 38 and within a few years, at 45, I think.
Yeah, 45. That's when he became the oldest world heavyweight champion in history at 45.
Now, remember, when you get at 45, you're fighting some 20s, mainly 20-year-olds, 20-somethings. And to think that he managed to get the title back, you may argue, and some would argue that, well, wait, those weren't the top. There wasn't a young Ali among those. And Tyson, incidentally, I think was having legal problems at the time. I'm pretty sure he didn't. I could be wrong.
Was that the ear incident about that time, maybe?
Yeah, well, he had bigger problems than that thing in the ring. His problems are outside the ring, but they were much bigger. And he went to prison for a while.
Yeah.
So I don't think those two fought. Correct me, let me know if I'm wrong here on this, but I don't think Tyson fought Foreman. So that would have been, maybe Foreman wouldn't have made it back if he'd fought Tyson in his 40s, when Foreman's in his 40s. And Tyson would have been substantially younger. Anyway, so some can argue that there wasn't a young Tyson at that age available to fight him, nor an Ali, and some truly great fighters in that era. Those of you who are experts, let me know the ways in which I'm wrong in this comment. But he made it. He did it. 45 years old.
It's amazing.
So George Foreman is a legend for a lot of reasons, but his longevity in his career has to be one of those reasons. His win-loss record has to be one of those reasons. I mean, there are people who retired undefeated. Rocky Marciano was a heavyweight fighter. He's the only one I can think of who he retired undefeated. Never lost a fight in his career.
Yeah. Get out while the getting's good, right?
Yeah.
While you're on top.
And I'm pulling this information from, I haven't looked at this in many years, but he's the only heavyweight that I know of that retired undefeated. And in his case, I think he had 50-something fights, maybe less, but let's say he had 50-something fights. So is that impressive? Of course it's impressive. But still, I mean, a guy that goes on to fight as long as Foreman did and to have this 80-something fights and win 81 and to win 76, to lose only 5 with that many versus losing 0 with 50 whatever. I mean, they're both impressive numbers. I'm a little more impressed with the guy who loses 5, but it's a bigger number and who has a longer career of fighting. Marciano retired when he was pretty young, but comparatively speaking.
The timeout is what's incredible, too, to be able to get yourself back in shape enough to get into the ring.
Yeah.
Because, let's face it, you even have a week of vacation. You tend to maybe, eat the treats. You know what I mean?
Well,
and getting back in shape. I mean, he did it.
And let me make a comment on that, too. I think he was not in as good a shape later on as he should have been.
Okay.
Now, maybe he was in the fight where he regained the title. Mm-hmm. He may have been in good shape in that fight, but I looked at some of the other fights during that era. What's his name?
Michael Moorer.
Michael Moorer. So I looked at some other fights during that period, and I don't know. I feel like he didn't keep himself in good enough shape. Which makes it all the more impressive. I mean, to the extent that we make this criticism, you have to say, well, look at his record. And it kind of suggests that he had even greater potential talent than we see. So George Foreman is certainly a person to be admired in a lot of ways. Before we talk about, his retirement and then get into, we'll talk a little bit about his family, and then, of course, we want to get to talking about the estate. The way Foreman lost his title was that he refused to defend it after a while. So he gets the title, which is, again, in fairness, the guy's 45 years old. He's kind of fought his way up to get there from 38 years old, so 7 years getting there. And I think that he liked the View, as a comfortable place to be, world celebrity, holding the unified title. And I think he wasn't inclined, motivated to defend his title any more than he had to. And finally, there was a candidate that he was supposed to defend it with, and he didn't. And he essentially forfeited his crown. So that's how he ends up retiring. It's probably a very good idea, incidentally.
Yeah.
And that's in a case where he made some good decisions. And that retirement occurred in what year was it?
That was 97. He was 48.
48. So 1997, the grill, which we'll just take a slight detour, we'll get back and talk to the family before we do the business. But the grill came along before he retired, the George Foreman grill.
Mm-hmm.
What year did he first do that?
The grill came out in 1994.
So that we have to put that in this picture to think, well, why would he walk away? And he was seeing some success that no one predicted, even the people who invested. I mean, the people who originally developed this grill, they didn't foresee that success. So we're going to come to that one second. But now let's talk about his family. You can't ignore George Foreman's family. I mean,
no, there's so many Georges involved.
I'll let you talk about the family a little bit.
Well, he had 5 sons and 7 daughters. And, a lot of people have talked about it over the years. All of his sons had the name George in their name.
And middle name.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, the full name was the same.
But they were all called something different. So he had George Jr.
Unofficially.
Yeah. And then George the Third was Monk. George the Fourth was Big Wheel. The Fifth was called Red. And the Sixth was Little Joey. So that's the lineup of the 12 kids.
And so that you understand this, people will say, well, he named all the kids the same. Well, technically, there was a junior, and I don't know why there wasn't a second, because you can have a junior and a second.
But then you went
Hank
just junior
Williams,
to third.
Hank Williams is one person comes to mind.
Yeah, his son,
he had a
the junior, and I guess junior's son is Hank 3. That's what they call him.
Yeah, but isn't there a second that's separate from junior?
I don't know.
How's that work, Justin?
Because I see a third and a fourth and a fifth.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I know in this case.
Junior?
I know in this case there's not a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Second's
But
not the junior.
it's a junior, and then there's a third and fourth.
Okay.
But I'm just curious about, isn't a second something different from a junior that it's acceptable to? I guess
always thought
not.
they were the same. Yeah, the junior and second.
Okay, so
Because it's like the mini me. Right?
so he was. What was his explanation? His explanation
It was a common bond to ensure that common bond between him and his sons, that they had that same name.
And among each other, the sons among each other. So,
because they're not all the same mom.
I mean, that's yeah. And how many moms?
Oh, goodness. That is questionable.
Well, let's just say
we dug in,
total number of wives.
Total number of wives, he had 5. So the first wife, 6 kids with, but it's kind of uncertain as to even some of their birth years.
So we're talking about a total of 12 kids, and it's less important that we get right who each of these 5 mothers' children are than to just say there are these 12 kids.
Yeah. 2 adopted.
And those were adopted after the year 2000. So he was older. He adopted 2 kids. And of these wives, it sounds really incriminating to hear that somebody had 5 wives, or at least in my judgment, it seems incriminating.
Yeah, but it didn't last. Most of them didn't last long.
Well,
no more than 3 years, the first 4.
And that's the point that has to be made, is that this is not a case where this person was just dissolute and made all these bad decisions throughout his life and had a whole bunch of wives. In his case, they seem to be concentrated in the years before he was like 35 or 36. And so when he meets the woman of his life, the person who is now his widow, he was, let's say, pretty sure he was 35. They stayed married. So they made it to 40 years.
Yeah.
40 years.
They were together up until, he passed.
Yeah, married in 85, and he passes this year. So
there's 40. Maturity level.
So when you hear 5 wives, you think, oh, this person's just a chronic guy who gets divorced and remarried. Divorce lawyers love guys like this, but the fact is that's unfair to him, because some people mature in that way later. Yeah. And it's not ideal.
No, and he's in the celebrity world. It's a different world.
Yeah, but also that's often that incriminating pattern that we talked about. In his case, he comes around. He's about 35, which is a little late. If he were the husband of one of my daughters, I would expect that he would have come around presumably before he married them, and it wouldn't be when he was 35 and they were maybe 35. But in this case, these marriages, as you point out, less than 3 years. One was for a year.
Yeah, one was for a year. His third wife, just 1 year.
So I just think this is a little exculpating, is my point in making this distinction.
But he did seem to pull the kids together. So the kids all knew each other. And the blend, there was a blend of a family, if you will.
Yeah, and you and I should talk about that too, is that these kids, from what I can find, and look, any family, you're going to find some negative stuff out there. But in preparing for these shows, we try to, we look for the bad as well as the good. We don't intend this to be something that confers sainthood on whoever we're talking about. And I have to tell you, I wasn't finding much negative.
There was no big drama.
Yeah.
It one son got in a little bit of trouble.
Well, we might.
Yeah,
we'll talk about them individually in just a second. But and there are those things. But when I look at him as a parent, and I tend to think, that's among the 2 or 3 things that are perhaps most important in our lives, is that we bring children in the world to give them attention and care for them and give them the best shot at being good people. And it doesn't require money to do that, but money might help, might hurt. My wife, if she was here, she would say money hurts. But I can tell you that he really did give a lot of time to his kids. He was self-critical. Later in life, he expressed regret. He said, I was too tough with my kids. I was too hard on them.
Yeah.
And I can imagine he's a tough guy. I mean, he grew up in as we mentioned, tough circumstances. In a poor neighborhood, and he was on the street, and that was what he was encouraged to find alternatives to what he was doing, which would have landed him in prison. He had already gotten into some trouble with the law, and so the Job Corps came along that we described. So that's his background. So he ends up being a father of 12 kids. Well, you can see where, he wasn't exactly apprenticed through a program on being a super dad. He didn't have Ward Cleaver modeling that. I doubt he ever watched Ward Cleaver on TV. I mean, so he had no point of reference, really, and a lot of us don't, depending on how we're raised. I was fortunate, but maybe some of you weren't. So it doesn't mean that he didn't have a duty to figure it out. But I think we should acknowledge that he did figure it out.
Just takes a little time. Like you said, not everybody's on the same course.
Yeah. And as far as I could find, he continued to be involved with the kids. He was really proud of, 15 grandkids? 15 grandkids.
I can't imagine. I mean, holidays at their house. I
was just thinking, what's that Christmas bill looking like?
Exactly.
And I'm sure, and he did. He spent liberally on the kids.
Spoil them rotten. Yeah.
So
that's what grandparents do.
Yeah. So he was. I think that he should really be congratulated for his efforts to be a great father through a very we talk about mixed marriages or hers and ours. Well, this is across 5 women.
Yeah,
and
it can't be easy.
And to manage to keep the kids, clear-headed about each of the parents' roles and whatnot is difficult. And the kids, when they're half siblings, that can produce
jealousy
tension
here and there, and
I mean, each of the kids is hearing a different story from their mother, and then all the kids, have a tendency to believe what their mother's telling them.
Yeah,
and so it can cause tension between the kids. Anyway, so we definitely, when we talk about George Foreman, we definitely want to acknowledge the many things he did well in his life. I think another thing that's worth looking at is kind of the careers of his kids.
I was going to say, because that some of them kind of did the same thing that their father did. So obviously they were close because the kids got into things like their dad. Some of them got into the ring. Some of them became movie producers. They owned a gym. So they were in it. They had talent. I mean, he had talent in the ring.
Well, let's kind of go down this.
Okay.
George Foreman Jr., is a marketing executive. He's apparently is employed by the company that was behind the George Foreman Grill.
Perfect.
And
Makes sense.
according to my sources, is still working with this company. He's in consumer products and whatnot. He also headed an organization for Foreman Boys Promotions with his brothers. So, several of his brothers got together and founded 2 or 3 different organizations, the most prominent of which is Foreman Boys Promotions that I could find. So they're very productive kids. There's George the Third, Monk, as he's called, and he has a 16-0 record as a professional boxer.
Yeah, he's out there in the ring. Mm-hmm.
So he's a founder of Everybody Fights Gym. It's a gym chain. I don't know how that's doing. He founded also Craft Boxing Club, Craft Boxing Academy. But as you said, several of them are in fields related to boxing. Let's see, producer on various projects. Oh, let's go to George the Fourth, called Big Wheel. That's his
nickname.
Big Wheel.
Big Wheel.
So again, work in public relations, marketing, licensing for his father's business ventures. So his father had a number of ventures apart from the grill that we'll talk about. So he's a producer on various projects, farmer, founder of Foreman Agricultural Service, and it was kind of a real estate investment fund focusing on agriculture. And then there's George Foreman V, Red, works in the family on the family ranch in Marshall, Texas. Apparently George Foreman has a huge spread.
He loves animals.
Yeah. Apparently, the real estate that he bought in Texas, he has a main house that is massive with a garage for, it 40 cars?
His car collection, very impressive.
Yeah. So anyway, so one is running this ranch, and that's Red. And then we have George Foreman the Sixth.
Yeah, the baby George.
Little Joey. I wonder how little Joey is. Something tells me Joey's not little.
He's like 26 years old, so at least little as in young. No, but
so we don't know much about him. Now, in fairness, there was one that had a brush with the law. What was that? Who was
Red.
that? And what would that
Number
involve?
5. I believe alleged felony assault in 2014.
Well, I'm sure it was self-defense. But yeah. You think the son of Judge Foreman, you'd hate George Foreman. You'd hate to be on the receiving end.
Oh my gosh! Can you imagine growing up and they find out your dad's George Foreman, and it's like, oh, the bullying.
No, I doubt they bullied them much. Anyway, so let's go to the daughters. Georgetta Foreman, TV producer, worked on shows like Divorce Court, Let's Make a Deal. Head of media relations, Emmy-nominated supervising producer at Entertainment Studios. Wow.
So showbiz is definitely in the family all over.
Yeah. Then there's Frida. She's passed away.
She passed away, but she got in the ring. She was a pro boxer. Then she retired. Then she was a boxing promoter. But sadly, she passed.
There was suicide, wasn't it?
I believe so.
And it was in 19?
That was in 2019.
So, and she had 5 and 1. So she had won 5, lost 1. I mean, that's pretty good. So we don't know what's behind that, but anyway, apparently it really devastated George. It was. Read several accounts for those who knew him. He never fully recovered from that. So even though it's interesting, you have 12 kids, but they're all equally important to you, and you lose one, it's not like you say, "Oh, I have, 11
I've got extra," right? So, no, not that at all.
Spares.
It's all together. That's the family. It's all of them. Yeah.
So that really did, and a death from a suicide, I can imagine in many ways would seem worse.
Well, especially when she was a boxer like her father.
Yeah. So then there's Leola Foreman, stand-up comedian, YouTuber. I'll have to check that out. She earned a doctorate in education and taught at the university level. She married a former NFL wide receiver, Milton Wynn, W-Y-N-N. Isabel Foreman, and she was adopted. Blogger, lives in Sweden. We don't know much about her. Courtney.
Courtney stays out of the spotlight, from what I understood.
Yeah, and she was also adopted. Yeah. So, I mean, the kids seem to be all being productive, and it's just, it's pretty impressive, and for him to have maintained the relationship with them as well as he did, given his background, I think it's worth noting. So those of you who watch this channel, you know that commonly we break these episodes into 2, sometimes 3 parts. And it works well because it's a pretty clear line between talking about the life of the person to kind of set up their situation with family and other things, and then to talk about end of life as well as, the estate issues. Today we've talked about their life, family, and beyond somewhat. And so in the next episode, we'll pick up, and it'll be more the end of life as well as talking about the estate planning issues. So I hope that you find this interesting and you tune in for the next show. See you next time.
We hope you enjoyed Life's Third Act, sponsored by Cordell & Cordell, your advisors for estate planning and beyond. Subscribe and join us weekly for thought-provoking discussion and topics exclusively focused on estate planning and your financial future. Discover more at CordellCordell.com. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.